The nonprofit TAT Foundation was created in 1973 to bring spiritual seekers and finders together. We publish books, videos, and a free online newsletter. We maintain a website of spiritual resources and hold 4 spiritual retreat weekends each year. Our goal is to offer practical guidance for following a spiritual path and living a spiritual life. For more information, go to tatfoundation.org. That's tatfoundation.org.
Earlier this month, started reading. I actually started watching his tracking videos online, and that really grabbed my attention because I always thought that's what we always did. Like Seth and Corey was like tracking your mind and going in there and like sniffing out, where it's all hiding and then going there and finding nothing. So I was really resonating with this, and then I started digging more, and I found out that he was a leader of 2 notorious biker gangs, and then became a yoga teacher, spiritually awakens, then lives that through his work as a renowned wildlife tracker, a teacher and a photographer, and he is like everybody else is pointing out to that conundrum of the self, the seeker, and getting in the way of what is sought. So let's welcome Paul.
Thank you. I don't know what's going to happen. Do you? Sometimes I'll start a sentence not even knowing what the next sentence will be. I don't know where it's going. There's no need of a plan. Nobody to get in the way. Just form and the formless moving as one. I don't know what I'm about to say, but whatever comes out, whatever I'm saying, what I'm not saying is probably more important. My mind might stop sometimes, and I'm just asking you to be in that silence with me. What I'm not saying might be more important than what I'm saying. And I hope you don't believe anything I say. Not pointing to something that has anything to do with belief. I think belief might be the problem. I did have thoughts about, the whole name of this weekend is about now, right? So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit, maybe, and then we'll see what flows out of that. And this is going to sound redundant because it's going to sound like what Paul Hederman was saying. I don't get it. How can you not be in the now? I know that sounds familiar. You might think that, well, I can get lost thinking about the future, and get lost in the future. But you don't have a time machine. You're not really in the future. That's all happening in the now. You might get lost thinking about the past, lost in your mind, say, and you think you're not present. But that's happening in the present. So all this is coming and going in presence. The thinking you're not present is coming and going in the presence with a capital P. Everything that ever happened is this happening now, all the way back to the Big Bang. That's happening now. It was always happening now. Life and death are coming and going in the present. The present is not coming and going. It's the essence. I'd like to start off, I might go into some metaphors and tell a story. Paulette and I we spent some time with Native American culture. And they use storytelling to communicate. At least my experience is some of them do, and they do an incredible job. And sometimes they use their own personal story to share something. They're not trying to simply talk about themselves, but their whole story is to share something they're trying to get across to you, and they use their personal story to do that. And I might do that to some extent. So first, I want to go back to the little baby less than a year old. We've all been there. A little Buddha. In that child, the formless is form, and form is the formless. There's no distinction. There's just pure openness, awakeness. And what an incredible intelligence there. It doesn't need thought. You watch, I'm sure most of you watched how fast a little child like that can learn. That's our essence. That's already there, right from the beginning. So we're going to go back in time into the past that doesn't exist. And we're going to, for a metaphor, I'm going to use, hope it don't upset anybody. I'm going to use Adam and Eve. We're going to bring them into this story. Okay? When they were in the Garden of Eden, they were Buddhas. In them, thought was moving freely with no help of a thinker. Thought was just moving. Form was the formless, and formless was form. Something happened back there. But it's here now. The past is here now. And again, it's just a metaphor. So at some point, thought is moving randomly. It's just doing its job. It's just responding to different stimuli. At some point, without intention by anyone, a thought occurred, came up in this universal consciousness. And the thought was, those are my thoughts. Big trouble. That's here now. We're still attached to that thought. That thought had lots of implications. It implied a doer, a thinker. It implied separation, ownership, control. Self was coming into being. The separate self, the separate one, what the Christians called satanic principle. That's with us now. The past is here. We're moving with that. That, in an essence, was saying, those are my thoughts. I'm thinking those thoughts. I have control over those thoughts. I'm aware. I have awareness. It attached itself, as time went on, it attached itself to various ideological principles and belief systems. Creating an image about itself. So now we're going to go back to the child. In this case, it's me that was born, little Buddha, like we all are. I love to hold a baby, just holding up little Buddha. So innocent. So I grew up in a Catholic family, And it was a strict Catholic family. Tell you a little story about my grandfather. He was very strict Catholic. He was a farmer, dirt farmer. And I'll never figure this story out, but I think it's just kind of a funny story. You'll get a kick out of it. And then you'll go, huh? What was that about? So he had 14 children. Not all of them lived. And he worked his farm. He was very successful. He was a very strict Catholic. And when I used to go visit him, he lived till he was 98. I would go visit him, and his family was all gone. They were all married, had their own kids and everything. And he would say, Paul, why is God keeping me here? I done my work. I done my job. Why doesn't he take me? Every time we would go to see him, he would come up with this. And he said that he was 98, and then just before he died, he said, thank you, God, thank you, thank you. And he died. So I grew up in this kind of very strict Catholic with this, identified. So we learn it is programmed into us, and it's not consciously, intentionally programmed into us, but we grow up in it. Happened a long time ago, happening now. It's ancient. And we're stuck. So as a kid, I believed in God. I believed in Santa Claus. I believed in Tooth Fairy. And that's just a given. I really believed that I was thinking my thoughts, that I had awareness, and I could have more or less of it, depending on I could do different things, meditate, whatever, although I wasn't into it at that time. And life, everybody else is living that same reality around you. It's reinforced all the time. There's no questioning it. There's no questioning your belief system. There's no questioning why you talk English instead of Portuguese or I had some kind of, there was something going on with me, and to this day, I don't know what it was, but there was this thing about fear. And when I was a kid, I was really into hunting, had a lot of guns. I had this sawed-off 16-gauge double-barrel shotgun, right? And there was this thing, I wanted to face fear. I wanted to be a tough guy. I wanted to be strong, male, Sometimes I would take my gun, and I knew a place in the woods. I was a real country boy. And I knew a place in the woods where the woods was so thick that you couldn't walk off the path if you wanted to. So I would pick a night where I couldn't see my hand in front of my face, really overcast, extremely dark, and I couldn't see a thing. And I would go to that path, to face fear. Sometimes I'd be walking along that path and a grouse would fly up, like 2 feet away from me. Both barrels would go off. Just out of total shock and fear, the triggers would be pulled. I didn't have it on safety. So how do you conquer fear? You know, it just... But I was good at being tough. At first I wasn't. I used to get beat up all the time. But something changed and I learned how to fight. And I became known as the toughest street fighter in Fall River, Massachusetts. That was a big deal. What an image. So you're building, you know, I mean, what's it for you? A feminist or a lawyer, or what's your image? But there's a sense of power in that. Security in that. Also can be threatened. People would come just to fight me to see if they could beat the toughest guy in Fall River. They were way bigger than me, but I knew how to fight. So that gave me a sense of security, my whole image. And every time I beat somebody up, supported my image, right? Eventually, I found myself the leader of a notorious motorcycle gang. And talk about image. Come on. The way we dressed, the sounds of the Hollies, riding out there ahead of the pack, the feeling of pride and power. The image, the self just loves it. But on the other side of that, it always can be threatened. It always has to be held up. You always have to make sure that you're portraying that tough guy image. We used to have a guy in one of the clubs, we used to call him Gorilla, and he was like a gorilla. We were always partying, doing drugs and partying constantly. And last time I saw him, went back into the clubhouse, he was out beating up an old junk car out in back. We had this clubhouse that was on the farm. There was some junk cars in the back. I saw him swinging the door back and forth. Went back in. I just want to give you a little scene of how it was. And you know what he would do? He would come over and come up from behind me, and I felt like he was going to crush me. He was so powerful. But I had to be a tough guy. I didn't feel anything. Right? I always had to be the toughest guy. That is a lot of work, a lot of pressure. He had a brother we all had nicknames. My nickname, well, people used to call me Prez, but I also was called Capone. And then his brother, we used to call him Batman. So while Gorilla is out beating up a car, Batman's being Batman. We used to have these wild, wild parties, just insane parties. And the guys knew they could get Batman going to a point where he he really thought he was Batman. He really would think he was Batman. And the guys would start to chant, Batman, 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 Batman. All the guys are chanting like that. And he's, no, 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 because he knows he's going to turn into Batman. We're all on drugs here, right? Turning into Batman could be really bad. You'll understand that in a minute. So everybody's Batman, Batman's getting more intense, Batman, Oh no, he gets up on the table, he's getting ready to fly. He's going to fly, right? He's Batman, he can fly. Batman, Batman. He takes off, splat, right on the ground. Image. There you go. Gets back up, splat, right on the ground. Everybody's laughing and laughing, screaming, Batman. I don't know how he never get hurt. His brother opens the door to the clubhouse and throws a car door on the floor. Just a little picture of the whole scene. I don't know why I started reading Aristotle and Plato. But at some point during those biker days, I started reading Aristotle and Plato. Whoa. And I'm going, uh-oh. Okay, so something important happened. I didn't know it at the time. All of a sudden, there was a scene that this macho image, this tough guy, was only being tough because he was afraid not to be. And all the other guys were doing the same thing. The tougher they got was because they were afraid not to be. The undercurrent of machismo was fear itself. And that was like, bang, very clear. But the ego, the self, see, there was a scene there that revealed that had nothing to do with me. Just a light went on. But we're so programmed, we think we're doing the seeing. So the image reinstates itself and says, oh, yeah, wow, I saw that. Yeah, I see that. And it steals that seeing. Makes it like it did in Adam and Eve. It's still doing the same thing. But now I can't play the game. Does it make sense to play the game? The game's spoiled. Now what? I'm in this motorcycle game. Devil's disciples. I'm the leader of one of the chapters. And bad things are happening. I mean, there's guns going off. And I can see myself being expected to do something I don't want to do. I can see myself being expected to give orders I really don't want to give, and just expected of me. And it started to want out. Unless you're in that, you can't understand how hard it is to get out. But an out came. We were one of the toughest biker gang, like Hell's Angel clubs on the East Coast. And we were warring with another club called Gypsy Jokers. And I still had guns. I had a .357 Magnum in my drawer in my bedroom, loaded all the time. And I was sleeping. My wife was up. I had 2 kids at the time. That was my first wife. And somebody's breaking down the door. I hear my wife screaming and screaming. And I think it's the Gypsy Jokers. I'm running from my drawer. I got my hands on the 2 knobs. I'm ready to open the drawer and grab the gun and shoot over their heads. I figured I'd scare them off. I didn't really want to kill anybody. The bedroom door busts open. And all I see is cops and shotguns, and they're all pointing at me. If I would have had that gun in my hand, I would have been dead. My way out. My way to jail. Almost. I got 5 to 10 years suspended. I had all kinds of marijuana in the house. And I was, I worked 8 years as a heavy equipment operator. Was all, despite the drugs, despite the gang, I was only missed 1 day of work. And I was always on time. And my boss went to court and really made a good case for me. And that's what helped me. And I got suspended sentence. But now, it's like when that judge said, I pronounce you guilty, I sentence you to 5 to 10 years in Walpole State Prison. There was a silence that lasted forever. That's a really bad prison. Then he said, sentence suspended, 3 years probation. So now what? My macho image is destroyed. I had to take the hat off. But what we usually end up doing is we put another hat on. Maybe we don't even realize it sometimes. So I'm telling this story so you can put yourself in my shoes and walk with me here and look at your own image in your own situation. So I'm going like, well, what now? What is life about? I mean, really. So, I have this Catholic past and very religious, committed parents, and that was the beginning of my life. So I figured, well, must be about God. I need to get back to my religion. I need to take the sacraments. I need to be a good Catholic. So I put on a different hat. But I found out I couldn't take the sacraments because I was married to a divorced woman. So I couldn't be a Catholic. This was a dilemma, right? Now I want God. And I still believe in God. So I seek out this woman who is supposed to be a saint. Supposedly she did miracles and things. And I went to her for advice. And she talked, I had a long talk with her. And ended up coming away from there and taking a vow. So I was supposed to write the Pope and ask him to what is it called? Annul? Yeah, annulment. So I wrote the Pope. But meanwhile, I did a vow of celibacy and to prove to God that I was serious, and it was the hardest thing I ever did in my life. I vowed to a year of celibacy or until the Pope answered. And it took him over a year. And I didn't stop there. I prayed and prayed and prayed. But not only did I pray, there's a La Salette shrine where you climb the steps and pray the rosary on your knees. I don't know how many times I did that. I did that for a whole year. And I really thought, that God's got to be listening. I don't want to leave my family. And I just want to take the sacraments. I just want to be a good Catholic. I want to raise my kids. I want to support my wife. He has to hear me. And I've shown him how serious I am. The answer came back, no. Another hat got blown off. And when I realized at that time, it was the same hat. Seeking an identity, self-interest, self-concern, power, in the name of religion. But there was one big question now, and I didn't know the answer. I didn't know anymore if there was a God. That was drilled into me. But now I really, really didn't know. It was clear. And I had been studying St. John of the Cross, reading books like The Cloud of Unknowing, and I didn't care about the Catholic dogma. I was just really interested in the mystics. And then somebody handed me a book by Krishnamurti. And I didn't know it at the time, but look. Go back to the baby. The Buddha is there. The Buddha never went anywhere. All the energy is just seated in that image, in the self. activities of self. All the energy is just caught up in self-concern. It can't see anything else anymore. And even when the Buddha or seeing or awareness or openness is there, it steals it. Doesn't recognize it. It can't see it anyway. Because really, not real. So there was an energy there that was really wanted to know the truth about something. If there's an energy there that really wants to know the truth, it doesn't give a damn about self. It'll rip self to shreds. Beware. That's what we're not ready for. That's what we're avoiding. So I read everything I could. Doing Hatha Yoga. I amassed a whole library of books. I even got this cassette tape, these cassettes we used to have, audio tapes. And it was a tape to deprogram you. You would go to sleep with it on, and you would put it on every night, and would deprogram you, right? I tried everything. And everything just reinforced the sense of a doer, that somebody at some point in all of this, it became pretty clear that there really wasn't an actor. Or I thought it was pretty clear that there wasn't an actor. No self. Thought is just spontaneously moving, appearing in awareness, falling back into awareness, coming out of awareness, falling back into awareness. I seem to have left all the anger behind. All that seemed to be left behind. And I was even doing, as a Hatha yogi, I had my own ashram at that point, and I was doing satsang, the whole thing. We had a school of yoga in Bellingham, Massachusetts, and one in Providence, Rhode Island. And I had a staff of teachers, and it was fairly successful. So I was practicing 2 hours of yoga a day, doing meditation, and teaching yoga at night, teaching yoga on weekends. We were on raw food diets. We were practicing ahimsa, nonviolent eating. We were being really good. I was a real awake person and extremely attentive I remember one, and a long, long hair and a long beard. Really fit, you know. So one day I'm out back at the ashram. There was this beautiful, beautiful pine forest in there, and there was all kinds of pollen falling from the pines at that time of year, and the forest floor was almost aglow with it, and I had white sneakers on, and they were aglow with it. They looked psychedelic. I was just meandering through the forest, being attentive. One thing that Krishnamurti said, if he said anything, was pay attention. I was paying attention. Every footfall, every breath, every thought. I was in for a shock. Out of nowhere, there was nothing I did. There was nothing I could do. You know what the right word is? There was seeing. It wasn't my seeing. I was paying attention. But all of a sudden, there was a seeing that the observer was the observed. That the one who was paying attention, the seer, was the seen. It couldn't see itself. The seer was the thinker, the thought. The thought was watching the thought. Every time it tried to see itself, it would divide itself. It was totally blind, helpless, couldn't do anything. Everything it ever did was folly. It couldn't go to the party. It couldn't arrive. But as blatant and as that blindness was such a fact, there was no denying the seeing. You couldn't see the seeing. You couldn't touch it. You couldn't, transfer identification to it, which some people do, I think. It was a fact. And it's right there at the same time with the blindness. God was a fact. No belief system needed. Self was just in the way. What happens though, now that happened when I was around 30 years old. I'm 76 now. To me, learning starts there. And I hate to put it in terms that it deepens, but I don't know how else to say it. And what I found happens, like I've heard stories about in the non-dual movement, where people have these very, very powerful awakenings, and self is gone, it's just gone. And they open their websites and they start giving talks and everything, and all of a sudden they get really angry. All of a sudden somebody pushes the right button and, whoa, that's not supposed to be there. I'm enlightened. Because they identified with that happening. So that's not supposed to be there. You see, the authoritarian principle is back. There was still an image there. They feel like, oh, that probably wasn't an awakening, take the website down. But if the Buddha was still there, if awareness was still there, if there was no attachment to that happening, no identification with that event, and all of a sudden somebody pushes a button and there's anger, there's nobody there to do anything about it. It's just the mind is going to move. Look, ego's like this enormous, I'm stealing this from Adyashanti, right? I thought it's pretty cool. The ego's like this enormous fan spinning in this room. And waking up's like pulling the plug. The fan starts to slow down. It's going to take a while to slow down. All that energy that was in self, the image, that's in the tissue of the brain. There's part of the brain dedicated to that. Neural pathways, synapses, is that what they call them? But the brain's pretty malleable. And it's been like that for years and years and years. For some people, it may stop, but it also may come back. But it doesn't matter at that point. There's no image saying it shouldn't be there. It's the truth. It's reality. You don't argue with reality. It's just the nature of the mind and how the mind is moving. There's nobody doing it. It's just the mechanics of the mind. And there's clarity about that. And it just moves through. You don't separate yourself from it. And nobody do anything with it. So how does that affect us now in real life? Look at what's going on in the world. I won't talk politics, but look at all the violence, all the conflict, all the divisiveness, the anger, the hatred. That movement that started in the garden is here moving in the world. The inner is expressing itself outwardly in the world. And man, it's a mess. Look, you can get to a place where some Indian stages might get, and they seem to identify with the Godhead and say, let it all go to hell. Doesn't matter. Just stuff. Just made up stuff. The Buddhists go, whoa, re-identification with the Godhead. And the Buddhists are saying, form is formless, formless is form. That the formless is moving as form. They're one moving together. I'm not just awareness. I'm not just form. I'm that moving together. In this case, it's in the human form, and then there can be compassion. And the Buddhists always talk about compassion. And you want to communicate with other human beings. You see the suffering in the world. Man, I saw that suffering very deeply once. And I just cried and cried and cried. So, when people get together to solve problems, say 12 people get together to solve an environmental problem, they all have images that they're attached to. They're the thinker of the thought. They have these ideas how to solve the problem. Their idea. And they all come together, and they're very protective of their ideas. Very hard to hear the other person's idea. Very hard for those ideas. There's so much attachment to them, so much pride invested in them. How do we do anything? But if there's a realization that all those ideas are coming from the same mind, from universal consciousness. There's no image, there's no thinker. There's no attachment to the idea. People all have different perspectives. We all have different perspectives. We all have lived different lives. Different experiences. We see different paths and different ways to do things. That all becomes very valuable. You put all that together without attachment, and you're going to come to some answers, and problems are going to be solved, and we can work together without divisiveness and fear. So that's the practical sense of this. That we don't wake up as a species, it's going to be hell to pay. I don't know how it's going to happen. I don't know how to make it happen. If I had a key to that door, it would be hot. as I said, things can deepen. And I'm just going to throw this out. It may just fall on the floor or just go into thin air, which probably will. Right now we're awake. I mean, we're not asleep. But actually, physically sleeping, we're physically awake. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking psychologically. We're awake here, right? And we think we're aware. We're awake, we're aware. When we go to sleep, the awareness goes away. That's not the awareness I'm pointing to. The awareness that's awake, thinks it's awake now, is not the awareness that I'm pointing to. That awareness is coming and going in what we'll call universal consciousness for now, or the formless or the unborn, God. And sleep is coming and going in that. We can't know that. But that's the child. It's there, the Buddha. It's who we are, but we're also the form. That's sometimes I think we miss that. Things are born in that, and things die in that. Thoughts arise in that, and die in that. Am I overstaying my time? Is anybody? I have no idea what time it is.
Perfect.
Really?
10 minutes late.
Oh, 10 minutes. So do we break now, or is it question and answers now or later?
It's a break. 15-minute break.
Would people rather break now and do questions later, or do questions?
What we do answers now.
What?
We can do answers now and
Yeah.
questions later.
Maybe I shouldn't even ask. Let's just follow the
We can
format.
just do the question answer now?
Yeah? Are people okay with that? All right.
You say a little bit more about the same hat. The first hat that got blown off was the tough guy who was the leader of the motorcycle gang.
Right.
The second hat that got blown off has something to do with being a good Catholic before
Right.
God.
Right. Right.
What are the similarities?
There's some real similarities. The tough guy is following some authoritarian principle, an inner authoritarian principle, as what it means to be tough. The Catholics following some authoritarian principle as to what it means to be Catholic. So they're all based on basic authoritarian principles that set up who we should be and who we shouldn't be, which sets up fear and conflict, bang, right away. So the whole system sets up fear and conflict from the get-go. And we're stuck there.
Can you say more about the self that transfers itself? Well, people identify with the seeing. They haven't lost the sense of self. They just put it onto the seeing, thinking that they've lost the sense of self.
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think in some cultures, what happens is that there's an identifying with the seeing, or we might call it the Godhead, in the sense of the eternal. And that's okay. It might give a sense of no fear of death. See, we escape death that way, right? But I think that the more holistic picture, in my opinion, is what the Buddhists go, whoa, you know, that's, how can you just say you're not the rest of it? There's nothing separate. I'm this body. Hello, hey, I'm this body. You know?
Those the guys who took their websites down after they realized that they hadn't.
Well, that's a little different because, see, there was an identification there with waking up. So sometimes when people have a powerful awakening or an awakening of some kind, it doesn't always happen that way, I don't think. It happens in various ways for various people. There's a thinking. I arrived, and I remember that coming up for me, and I was driving a semi, and I was on New Jersey highways. I forget where. I don't think it was New Jersey Turnpike, though.
Yeah, that can wake you up.
So I had this so-called awakening, right? So-called. And I'm just driving down the road, and this thought appears. And it says, does that mean I'm enlightened now? There's that rascal again. That guy doesn't quit. It's just something else. You know, I just couldn't believe he had the audacity to do that. You know, he had no right to do that. There was no way. You know, and to me it was the cosmic joke, and I just was laughing. I could not drive the truck. I was in hysterics. And I had to get that truck over to the side of the road as soon as possible. And there wasn't much of a shoulder there, you know? That's not a good thing to do. I had to. Over the truck over the side of the road, laid on that steering wheel, and just laughed my guts out. It's damn good that no trooper come along, and I wouldn't have been able to talk to him. He would have took me away in a white coat. But see, that wasn't allowed to come in because there was no identification. See, there was no identification with being awake. There was nobody there who was awake. But if there was somebody there that was awake, they'd be pretty upset if they saw self or they saw anger, because they're not supposed to see that. See, the authoritarian principle is reestablishing itself. And it's not seen. That's what I was trying to point to. I should probably set you free. I wish I could. But I mean, a lot of you understand what I'm saying, right?
When did tracking enter the equation?
Oh yeah, I mean, I only had an hour or less. That was so that was the event, and sometimes I hate to say the event, but I mean, you have to deal with reality here, I think. Happened when I was in the ashram. And then my first marriage, I lost my first family. And found myself alone. Let's see. Yeah, and then I drove truck for quite a long time. And then the tracking thing happened with you, Paulette, right? Yeah. So when the ashram dissolved because of the marriage breakup, I still continued to one-on-one with a lot of my students. But there was no venue like this here to communicate with people. And I was very close to nature. I lived very close to nature and was always interested in tracking wildlife and becoming intimate with the natural world. And for me, there was a real intimacy there, and there was a real passion to understand the interconnectedness and the web of life, and that was a big part of my life, which I left out. And I was working for a biologist, doing tracking, actually tracking deer, doing this deer study. With my job, track deer all day. And writing down everything deer did. But that was part of a study. And I remember the biologist said, I found out about this guy, Tom Brown, and he was making a living teaching tracking and all this nature stuff. And I told the biologist, I said, gee, maybe I can do that. He says, you're crazy. We ended up having one of the leading schools in North America. We had 15 instructors at some point in an office of 4 of us. And it was an incredible way to teach, because like I would never know, I would go out into the forest with a group of people, I would never know what the teaching was going to be. Nature knew. And it just presented stuff. And it presented stuff like this. This is an example. So I have a weekend group, and we go out all day, Saturday, we're in the snow, and we're tracking fisher cats. They're like big weasels. Right. I don't know if you know what a fisher cat is. They're very interesting to track. They're very successful predators. And so when you track them, you really, really get a window into their life, and you really get to know an animal when you track it long enough. So it's a process of becoming intimate with nature, with these beings. But the next day, I take them, and they've seen hundreds of fisher tracks and dozens of trails, and tracking fisher all day. The next day, we go out into the forest, and there's a line of tracks, and I say, what's that? Silence. There's 15 people there. Okay, folks, what is that? You can bet your life that there was a thought came up when I said that, and a lot of those, see, thought moves by itself. Thought comes up in their minds in Fisher. But there's something there that's thinking the thought, you see, and it's afraid that it might be wrong. Fear gets in the way of the movement of thought. Thought doesn't need you. Just getting in the way. Stops the free flow of thought. So you get an opportunity to point that out. You see, there were all these little gems of opportunities to point things out. We came to some sign on the ground. There were these swirls. There was a little mouse tracks next to it. And there was these sweeping swirls next to the mouse tracks in the sand. So I asked people, okay, so what's going on here? And that their minds are afire with trying to figure it out. You know, it's like a roadster taking off and people are flying all kinds of ideas. Well, it must have been a hawk swooped down and made this swirl with its wings and it tried to get the mouse. Or a fox came along and that's its tail swooping across. Your mind can do anything with it. And I'm saying, just observe. Stop trying to think it out. Stop. Just look at it. So they're all sitting there and they're just looking at it and looking all the time. All of a sudden, a wisp of wind comes in and blows these tall grasses that are leaning over, blows it. Answer. So it had all kinds of opportunities there. How long did we do that before we totally burnt out, Paulette?
Almost 20 years.
Yeah.
Do you think you're ever being tracked along the way?
Oh, we would. You would be tracked sometimes. And interesting that if I can remember, my memory's not that good. It's never been good since I was a kid. I was always amazed how people could remember things I couldn't. We were tracking a bobcat. Well, this has happened on different occasions, and I'll just give you a brief. At one point, we were tracking a bobcat, and we were hot on its trail. And it was lunchtime, though, so we stopped to have lunch. While we were having lunch, the bobcat came over to look at us. He actually came. We couldn't see him, but he could see us. And when we tracked the rest of the way, we found out that he came back. Okay, so there's another quick story. So I have had animals track me, but this is a really interesting one where we were on, it might have been a week long. I'm not sure, or it was a week. Anyways, we were a group of people. We used to make small groups, and we were tracking the bobcat again, and we jumped the bobcat out of its lay. So we tracked it right to where it was laying, and it jumped out of there. The tracks turned fresh. We knew we were hot on that bobcat. And I said, okay, we're not going to disturb him at this point. Just let him go. Just let him be. Which I find too, the animals don't get that disturbed when you track them, actually. And this is a case in point. But there was a lot of young people there, man. They were fired up and they wanted to track that cat. The cat knew they were tracking them. Now I said, we're not going to learn much about the cat. You're just going to learn about what a cat does when people are tracking him. You're not going to learn what he does in his natural world without the influence of people. Oh, we want to track. So we have walkie-talkies. take one of the walkie-talkies, and me and this old guy stood back and let the kids go. And we're standing there talking softly, and I look, and this bobcat's walking right towards us. He was backtracking on the trail of those kids and came right to us because they left. He looked at us and went, whoa. And he didn't like freak out or anything, played it cool. I find that some animals seem to they want to play it cool. Nothing wrong here, I'm just getting out of here. And I get my walkie-talkie lights up. We lost him. He disappeared into thin air. That cat was smarter than they were. I mean, think about that. He was walking back on their tracks. And we've tracked bobcats. They would do, if they knew they were getting tracked, they would go to the thickest stuff they could find, and they would walk along these logs with these sticks sticking out, thinking, they ain't gonna follow me through here. And then they would take big leaps off of logs. They were really trying to throw you off. They were actually, but anyways, I don't bore you with that stuff. I should free you up, and thank you very much, Mark.
One more.
Sure.
Thank you. So, I really have a life at the ashram before the shock was pretty much what we all today want to have, eat well, have this peace, and be attentive, like Krishnamurti said, and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Then comes the shock, in which your relationship, subject, object disappears, or becomes the scene. The seer becomes the scene and all. So after the shock, and all this deepening that you say that happened, it deepens, right? Well, are you at a state right now in which everything just happens and you are this happening yourself? Is your lifestyle not attentive anymore, or whatever happened before at the ashram, or that lifestyle is come back with a different approach to it? Or what is your life right now?
The basic change that we're pointing to, and if we're going to survive as a species going forward, is understanding the limits, is just getting rid of this image. But I hesitate to say that because it makes we're setting up another authoritarian principle that says we shouldn't have this image. Now, I don't want to do that. We're back in the same boat. So it has to be taken care of in a different way. We don't want to make the image bad. Look, it's actually an opportunity. When anger comes in, when the image is moving, when you see you're stuck, that's an opportunity to learn. I was at a place with all this once where, when I was with my second wife, I was almost hoping that she would make me angry, so I could just see it, so I could learn. I couldn't learn about it if it wasn't there. I wanted to understand. I wanted to know the truth. What is this? And there was at one point where it came up. And you become more sensitive, not less sensitive. And that hit the feeling of it, I wanted to be dead. I could not handle the feeling of anger. It was way too much. It was, that never came back. I didn't do anything. It might come back. I don't think I'm done with it. I don't. Look, I used to be this hot-tempered young kid. You didn't want to mess with me. That's gone. I didn't have anything to do with it. That hot-tempered young kid could only be a hot-tempered young kid. Okay?